Guys, if you're curious where Nintendo were at when it comes to, physical games for the Switch 2, Doug Browser recently spoke to IGN in an interview. In part, he did this to sort of smooth things over, right? To say that, the game keycard offers options to publishers, right? That's sort of the main message that he was putting forward. Now, in this video, I'm going to sort of break down to a certain degree what I find most interesting about that assertion and sort of like my main initial thought process of that. So the rationale behind game keycards is provided by Browser in that interview is that it allows consoles to have the broadest and deepest library of content, to use his words, right? In other words, he's saying more publishers can publish their games on the Switch 2 as a result of the game keycards existing, right? The argument for this, I can only imagine, is that large, games with large file sizes, they can be published in a physical box cheaper than they could be on the Switch 1, right? A physical publisher can keep their games now on the Switch 2 on the retail shelf and not really have to worry about the variable costs of making that game into a physical release, right? It's always one predictable cost to produce a game keycard. There's no variability between, is this game going to need a 32 gigabyte? Are we going to need to do a 32 gigabyte in a patch, etc.? Large publishers recognize the advertising value of shelf space, right? It allows them to maintain the shelf space while still pushing their digital sort of digital first marketing strategies and product strategies, right? This falls flat a little bit to me as a sort of argument, right? Because publishers have already been able to choose to provide the rest of the game through patches, through online measures, right? It's technically a cost-saving metric for publishers who want the shelf space, right? But they don't care about the collector's market. They don't care about the market that exists for owning physical games, right? Some might see this as neutral, some might even see it as positive, but I don't see any of the publishers that benefit from the game keycard ever being limited from being able to bring their game to the Switch 2, right? Especially because of these variable costs when it comes to game keycards, right? A few dollars is still a few dollars no matter like the size of the company, right? I'm not going to pretend a company doesn't want to save money at any size, right? That's kind of ludicrous to assert, but these few dollars actually might mean something to an indie company. That could be your argument, right? Like, hey, these indie companies can release their games cheaper now. But the way the market stands is indie companies release digitally and then they release physically for the collector's market, right? As a way to essentially increase their potential revenue stream, is to go, okay, hey, there's a collector's market for physical games. We're going to engage in that. We're also going to release our game physically and make a decent chunk of cash from that, right? It's kind of a plan B sort of revenue stream for a lot of indie developers. So a smaller publisher might save this money on the manufacturing, but without physical collectors and an actual draw to own a physical game, this entire market doesn't exist for them anymore, right? So it doesn't seem so compelling that this is gonna allow publishers in general to release physical games cheaper. This is just not going to be the case, right? Because the actual physical game that people want it's not serving that market anymore, so that market won't really exist for indie developers. And not to mention that these AAA developers, for the most part, right, we're already looking towards the Switch 2 as a console release opportunity, right? I mean, let's be honest. Realistically, and in a bit of a conclusion, I read Doug's comments, and when I read that article as, hey, we saved a few more dollars for publishers who make AAA games. Because they're not going to put the whole game on the cart anyway, right? So hey, ipso facto, we saved them some money. Someone could argue that by saving large publishers money, you could keep AAA game prices down. I've heard that a little bit as a sort of thought process for this. I would argue that this is kind of ludicrous, right? I would argue that they will charge the most that they feel the consumer will accept, the same as they always have and always will do. So realistically, I don't see Doug's argument when it comes to this. He might be aware of nuance that I'm not when it comes to negotiations with AAA publishers and things like this, but I don't think the up to $5 cost variance and things like this on Switch game cards was really holding them back.